Bam. All right, guys. So I have graded everybody's quizzes. Except yours, Alfredo, you just submitted it to me, so I haven't gotten a chance to get to it yet, but I will get to it. I graded everybody else's quizzes. Everybody did really well, so I'm very pleased. Let me think. What else do I have going on today? All right, so today we're going to pick up, we are currently in week 3, so we're going to pick up with the nervous system part 2. We are going to be looking at the anatomy of the spine. We're looking at the spinal cord, spinal segments. We're going to look at the nerves that are coming off of it and start to get a better idea of what's going on in the peripheral side of things. So the first thing that we're going to look at are the spinal cord segments. And the names of these segments overlap beautifully with where exactly along the spine this nerve segment kind of pinches off and branches out into the rest of the body. Now, you guys are already familiar with how we named the spine, right? Cervical spine, thoracic spine, lumbar spine. And then we named the bones based on their order, starting at the top, right? C1, C2, C3, all the way down to, do you guys remember how many spinal vertebrae we had in each section? So we're talking about bones, right? We're talking about the spine itself. We're talking about bones and vertebrae. How many cervical vertebrae were there? 7. And how many thoracic?
12.
12. And how many lumbar?
5.
5. So the way I like to remember these is I think about my meal times. I have breakfast at 7, I have lunch at 12, I have dinner at 5. And when you add up all of the vertebrae, just coincidence of coincidences, there are 24 hours in a day. So 24 total vertebrae. For nerves, it's going to work very similar to this. So we're going to start in the brain in our little magic school bus. We're heading down the spinal cord. Once we exit the brain and we are officially in the spinal cord, we are in the neck. It's legit, guys. It's happening here. Before we even hit our first cervical vertebrae, right? We've barely stepped off the threshold of the occiput. Before we get to the bone C1, we already have a nerve taking its exit between the occiput and C1. That spinal segment is named, you guessed it, C1. Then we encounter the bone, C1, right, the atlas, and then another pair of nerves splits off. That is C2. You guys see where we're going with this? You picking up what I'm putting down? Now, the only thing that might catch you a little off guard, because we named a spinal segment at the very, very tippy top, that was C1. When we get down to the bone, C7, the next nerve that branches off is still technically a cervical nerve. So that one is going to be named C8. That's the one weirdo. After the nerve, C8, then we encounter the next bone, which is the vertebra T1, right? The first thoracic vertebra. After that, the next spinal nerve is also named T1. So now we're back on track. Bone T1, nerve T1. Bone T2, nerve T2. Bone T3, nerve T3. We hold that pattern all the way down to the end. The only place where the road gets bumpy, we have a new nerve segment called C8. Everything else, guys, is exactly as we would expect it. So there are 8 cervical segments, but then there are 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral segments, and 1 pair of coccygeal segments, 1 pair that comes out at the coccyx. So here's our spinal cord. And we're gonna zoom in, you'll see right under the brain. Let me add the bones in so we can see. Right there is the spinal segment C1. It's coming out superior to the bone C1. And then as we keep traveling down, this bone here will be, nope, sorry. This bone here will be C7. So there is C7. So the nerve coming out proximal to that, there will be your 7th cervical nerve. So the nerve C7, then the bone C7, then the nerve C8. And then we get back on track with the bone T1, and then the spinal nerve coming out from underneath it would be the nerve T1. Good stuff. We're clear, ready to roll. Super. When we talk about thoracic segments, we are simply talking about those nerves that are exiting in the thoracic region of the spine. Same story with the lumbar nerves, all of those nerve segments poking out in the lumbar region. When we head down into the sacrum, you got to turn to the anterior view really for this one. We will see all of those spinal segments that are coming out of the sacral foramina. Those are sacral segments. Those get labeled with S. So we have S1, S2, S3, so on and so forth. The final pair are the coccygeal nerves. That is the pair coming out. I'm going to try to get. Ooh, that was a hard one. That was a little tiny thing I had to tap on. 5th sacral nerve. No, that's not it. Where's my coccygeal nerves? Maybe that's it. There we go. The coccygeal nerve. One pair of coccygeal nerves. Those also get labeled with a C. So the coccygeal nerve would be labeled C1. It's a head scratcher, you guys, but it's just one of those things you got to look at the context, right? If we're talking about neck stuff and we say C1, we're probably talking about cervical. If we're talking about hip, and like the coccygeal nerves, guys, are involved in like defecating and things like that, like stuff around the coccyx. So when you're talking about defecation or hip stuff and we say C1, we didn't just somehow transport all the way up to the neck. We're talking about the coccygeal plexus, right? The nerve C1 down there. Now, when you start thinking about what do those spinal segments go on to do, right? Where does C1 go? Where does T4 go? Where does L5 go? The basic idea is if you start at the top of the spine and work your way down, you look at the rest of the body, like the upper neck and then the neck and shoulder and then down into the arm. Then we get into thoracic and abdominal organs. And then at the bottom, we get down into like hip muscles and things like that. That's pretty much the way the tree is laid out. So when we look at cervical nerves at the very top, we're talking about head, neck, right? C3 is the diaphragm, so keeping you breathing. Now we understand why breaking your neck up there usually ends your life, because that's like where super basic stuff is going. As we get about halfway down the neck, now we're looking at nerves that innervate the deltoids and the biceps. We keep going down, we get triceps and eventually hand muscles. As we move into the thoracic spine, we start seeing things like chest muscles and abdominal muscles, which is exactly what you would kind of expect to see. As we move into the lumbar nerves, leg muscles, hip muscles, things of that nature. Sacral nerves, think about where the sacrum sits, right in the middle of things with the pelvis. We're talking about bowels, we're talking about bladder, right? We're talking about sexual function, things of that nature. Make sense? Good stuff? All right. I want everybody to take a nice deep breath. You do not need to know the destination of every spinal segment. You do not need to know where every single nerve is going. What I would like you to have an instinctive awareness is the higher you go, the higher you go, right? The higher you go, you're talking about arms and shoulders, right? You go a little lower down the spine, you're talking about chest. You go a little lower, you're talking about abdominal. You get down to the bottom, we're talking about hip and pelvis and legs. Make sense? That's what I want us to be aware of. So if someone's asking you a question like, which of these nerves innervates the hamstring? And the nerves you're given are C7, T2, T5, or L4. Let's take a guess here, right? I don't need to know where every single nerve goes to. What I need to know is lumbar is probably going to go to the legs. And now you can make a good guess. You picking up what I'm putting down? You whiffing what I'm wafting? Good stuff. Okay. Vertebral structure. Cervical and lumbar, the spinal cord within the cervical region and the lumbar region is enlarged compared to the thoracic spine. And that slideshow gives you a cute little illustration. Let me show you guys a little bit more what I mean. I'm going to take off all the bone and I'm going to thin out some of these nerves. Focus on the spinal cord itself, you guys. And what we're specifically looking at is the thickness of the spinal cord. Do you notice how the spinal cord is very thick in the neck region? As we get down to the thoracic spine, it seems to become much thinner. And then as we travel down into the lumbar spine, it begins to enlarge again. That's all we're talking about, guys. That's all I'm saying. The spinal cord's thicker in the neck and in the low back. It's thinner in the thoracic region. The reason for that is there are cell bodies of motor neurons. So think about your thoracic spine doesn't have that many muscles it needs to innervate. Think about these like thin, pretty compact little torso muscles, abdominal muscles, things like that. But the cervical spine, think about every single muscle going to the shoulder and arm and forearm and hand. All of those nerve bodies have to be somewhere, right? It's just the axon that's going out into the arm. So all the nucleus and all the fun stuff, right? The bodies of those cells, they all have to be contained within the spinal cord in the cervical region. Same story when the lumbar, right? You think about all the different muscles of your hip and your thigh and your leg and your foot. All of those cell bodies are going to be located in the lumbar spine. Cool beans? Cool beans. Fun fact from the bone guy. You can even see that reflected in the vertebrae themselves when you look at them. The vertebral foramen is larger on cervicals and it's very narrow in thoracic vertebrae. That's one of the ways that you can look at like a C7 and a T1 and kind of like tell them apart really quickly. The thoracics almost always have really narrow vertebral foramen. Just a fun fact. Okay. Another fact about the spinal cord, and you guys probably noticed it over here. Do we see how the spinal cord in the thoracic and the cervical spine, it's a proper cord, right? Like it looks like a single structure until you get down to the lumbar spine. And then all of a sudden we've got this little kind of swelling, and then suddenly it stops being a spinal cord and looks more like a spinal cable. It's just all these little individual nerves all bundled together. That is a definitive structure, you guys. That is called the cauda equina, Latin for the horse's tail, because it's no longer a spinal cord. It's just a loose gathering of nerves, kind of like a horse's tail. The cauda equina begins after L1. The spinal cord proper, the proper spinal cord stops at L1. Everything from L2 onward is cauda equina. So next thing we're going to look at is the spinal cord, and we're taking a transverse section. So think about taking the spinal cord, cutting it like a tree. Now we're going to look down at the rings of the tree. And what we notice with the spinal cord is it has a very definitive kind of butterfly or H-shaped structure that is physically darker than the remaining matter. This is what we're referring to when we talk about gray matter versus white matter in the brain. Gray matter functions to process information. It's found on the interior of the spinal cord. These cell bodies are unmyelinated. So there is no myelin. They are connected directly to each other, which means, number one, their transmission rate is a little bit slower, but they tend to be connected right close to each other. So it doesn't really have to be that fast. It does not have that far to travel. Remember, guys, myelination is something that helps boost the signal, particularly when the signal has a really long way to go. So motor nerves and things like that will generally be myelinated. But when you're talking about nerve tracks within the spinal cord and within the brain, it doesn't have that far to go. So we don't really need the myelin. And because it's not myelinated, right, there isn't that fatty layer around it, it's darker in color. That's why. So the white matter, which is generally myelinated, would reflect that, right? Fat, you've seen fat, it's kind of a yellowish, whitish color. There, that's why. There we go. So with this little H shape, right, you can see those smaller projections pointing to the anterior side and then the longer projections pointing to the posterior side. Those are the anterior horns and the lateral horns of the gray matter. Posterior horns connect strictly to cell bodies of neurons receiving sensory information. Anterior horns connect to cell bodies of somatic motor neurons. So we get sensory connection in the back and motor output in the front. Now, I get that that's kind of an odd arrangement, but here's the thing, guys. That's actually like a law. There's a law in neurology which says sensory neurons always plug in through the back and motor neurons always plug in to the front. Let me show you what I mean when we talk about plugging in and this and that. When we look at the spinal cord, what we're going to look at is one single segment, one pair of nerves as they branch out. And they all do the same thing, so it really doesn't matter which one we pick. Look closely. The nerve reaches the spinal cord. Its little nerve fibers kind of branch out, making all those little connections. But when we, But when we turn it to the side, notice, Jesus, this thing is hard. I'm sorry, it's hard to steer. Sorry. What I want you guys to notice is how one segment attaches on the anterior side, another segment attaches on the posterior side. That's what we're talking about. The posterior connections are always sensory neurons, afferent neurons. The anterior fibers are always motor neurons, efferent motor fibers. Good stuff. Cool beans. So how do I remember this? Well, I remember that time that my good for nothing ex was cheating on me, so I kicked his ass out, right? The neighbor told me through the grapevine. I got the news, the sensory input through the back door. And so when I kicked him out the front door. So everybody got to see it, right? Sensory in the back, motor in the front. That is just the way it is. It's a law. Look it up. Nerves always connect this way. Don't ask me why. We all have to die mad about it. The reason is embryology, but I'm not an embryologist. So, whew, cool. Sensory in the front, or sensory in the back, motor in the front. Good stuff.
I can't help but think of a mullet.
Yeah. What is it? What, business in the front, party in the back? Yeah. All right, so white matter. White matter, as we just said, white matter is white because those neurons are myelinated. Myelin is made of fat, so you're seeing the color of all those fat-covered neurons. White matter functions to carry information to other neurons. It's found outside the gray matter in tracts called columns. It is myelinated. It's composed primarily of nerve axons, which are wrapped in a myelin sheath. And here is just a picture, an illustration of that thing that I was just showing you guys. You got your spinal cord, each nerve segment plugs in, but there's an anterior fork and a posterior fork. It's the dorsal nerve root will always be sensory. The anterior nerve root will always be motor. Always, always, always. All right. Meninges. Meninges are layers of fascia that cover the central nervous system proper, the brain and spinal cord, that's all, just the two structures. They do not extend to nerves. They only cover the brain and spinal cord. When nerves branch off, they've got to poke through the meninges and go on about their lives. Meninges are connective tissue. They function to protect and support the central nervous system, and the meninges contain the cerebrospinal fluid. So the fluid is produced deep within the brain itself, and there are kind of like tubes that will carry the fluid out to the outside. So imagine the brain and spinal cord soaked in fluid, wrapped in a water balloon. So you've got the balloon on the outside, a water layer, and then the brain. That fluid cushion allows the brain and the spinal cord to kind of float in the skull, so they're not really pushing their weight down on the skull. It also, the fluid also helps with like shock absorption, so the brain doesn't get bruised every time it bangs against the inside of the skull. You've got a nice little fluid cushion there. But getting into the brain itself is a lot more complicated than it sounds, right? There's a lot of layers in between you and their brain. So the outermost layer would be the skin. And actually, hold on. This slideshow gives you a really cute illustration. My anatomy app gives me a better one. Let me look it up. Hold on. Where's it at? Scalp and meninges. Bam. So, like peeling an onion, right? We got to go layer by layer. Starting at the top, the first layer you see is the skin. Now, this is well outside our scope of practice, friends, but if we take out our scalpel and we slice around the skin and we peel it back a little bit, the next layer you'll see is the subcutaneous fat. We got to peel the fat back. This is the layer where your blood supply is. That's why you see the artery and the vein there. The third layer you see is the epicranial aponeurosis. We got to think back to muscles, guys. Remember the frontalis muscle and the occipitalis muscle? And there was that strip of tendon that wrapped around the front. It was called the epicranial aponeurosis, also known as the galea aponeurotica. But it's the tendon that connects your frontalis and occipitalis bones that lets you raise your eyebrows. After that, right, you peel back the tendon. The next layer is the periosteum of the skull. The periosteum of the skull. Once you cut through the periosteum and peel that layer back, you are looking at the true bone. Generally, if we're up here, this would be parietal or frontal bone. Remember, bone itself is permeated with nerve and blood tissue. So there are blood vessels inside the bone structure itself.
So it's porous.
I wouldn't say porous. There are like highly organized tracks that run like, think of like H's at like 90-degree angles. It's extremely organized inside of a bone. There are distinct canals where these blood vessels are laid in like piping.
Okay.
Yep. So now we take out our fancy surgical saw, we cut the bone, we lift the bone, right? You got your little autopsy cut. Now you're looking at something that kind of looks like the brain. You are looking at the dura mater, the outermost layer of the meninges. It's giving the brain a smooth grayish color. It does not yet look wrinkled like you would think a brain would. It actually looks rather smooth and very gray. Now, the dura mater is the name dura mater means tough mother. So it's a very dense layer of connective tissue. It is rather tough. Its function is protection. And so its structure reflects that. Now, it doesn't take much though. A surgical scalpel will do the trick. You slice around this layer, peel it back. Now you notice a very thin, almost like a spider web, like a gossamer type of structure that was just holding this layer down onto the brain. And as you peel it off, you've got these tiny thin little strings that are stretching and breaking as you peel it back. This is the arachnoid layer, the spider layer. This layer is full of fluid, and this is the layer where the cerebrospinal fluid is existing.
Is that kind of like fascia?
It is fascia, but it's a very, very delicate fascia.
Okay.
It's not dense and rigid like the dura mater was. It's extremely thin and very, very fragile. But all of these little strings that were connecting the two layers, there's fluid kind of intermixing amongst all these fibers. Yeah. So once we take this thin little layer, we peel that back. Now we've got cerebrospinal fluid. So now the surface of the brain is exposed. We notice that it is very moist. It is being kept, wet from this constant production and circulation of the cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid circulates with a pulse that is independent of the heartbeat and breathing. It is the third pulse, right? Breathing, heart, cerebrospinal fluid. This is the pulse that we are feeling for when we do craniosacral massage. It is extremely subtle. Your palpation skills need to be on par. It is a very, very faint pulse, but it can be detected with the fingers. And it is the whole basis of craniosacral massage.
Is this what you see when you have like a baby and because their plates aren't connected, so they have like a little heartbeat?
That's actually the heartbeat. No, that's the heartbeat.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
what you're seeing is
Wow.
their little heart pumping. And remember, the brain, crazy amounts of blood all the time, crazy amounts of blood in the brain. So what you're seeing is the literal heartbeat and the thumping of the brain. Yeah. Yeah, it's nuts. Now we're just looking at this wet layer, right? Cerebrospinal fluid is just that. It's just fluid. So you see right through, it's clear, you see right through it. So once you peel back that super transparent, thin arachnoid layer, you are looking at the naked brain, the brain itself. And it looks like you would expect a brain to look, right? Like all flesh colored and wrinkly, exactly what you would think a brain would look like. The reason it looked smooth and gray was just that layer of fascia that was wrapped around it. So if I add in connective tissue, there we go. When you open the skull, that's what the brain's going to look like. It does not look super remarkable, but we have to remove layers. Come on, layers of tissue before we get to the actual naked brain. So that is what this deal is illustrating to you. Starting on the skin, each step down is a new layer you got to cut through, right? Skin, periosteum, cranium, and then dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. Dura mater, the outermost layer. Dura is where we get our word durable from, which means tough or resilient. Mater, think about your alma mater, right? The school that you went to, your mother. Dura mater, the tough mother. This is where we get the word maternity and maternal. The third layer, or the second layer, is the arachnoid mater. It's the spider layer, because this is the layer that looks like thin gossamer spiderwebby strands. It's very insubstantial. There's not a lot to this layer, but anatomically it is there. So we label it and we acknowledge it. But it's a very thin, very delicate layer. The deepest layer, and the layer that is directly on the surface of the brain, is the pia mater. The word pia means delicate. It is the delicate mother. This is, again, a very thin, fragile layer closely surrounding the brain itself. So, pia mater, innermost, very delicate. Arachnoid layer, middle layer. Web-filled subarachnoid space where the cerebrospinal fluid and blood vessels are. And then the dura mater, the thick outer layer, the tough mother. This is continuous with the spinal cord covering, right? So think about like a zip up onesie, right? With little footies and a little hood, a little butt flap and everything. The dura mater wraps around the brain and the spinal cord, the whole thing. It's continuous. It's just one big structure. Okay, spinal nerves. Spinal nerves, by definition, they're part of the peripheral nervous system. They carry info to and from the spinal cord. Nerves will pass through the intervertebral foramen. And each spinal nerve has a pair of nerve roots. Nothing I have said here should strike us as remarkable. None of this should be new information. Every spinal segment has a pair of spinal nerves. That would be one on the left and one on the right. Each of those segments has a pair of connections, one on the anterior, one on the posterior. That's the sensory in the back, motor in the front. Yeah. And peripheral nerves, spinal nerves are all classified as mixed nerves because they do both. They both carry signals and receive signals. They are both afferent and efferent all together. We can use the same nerve to bring in sensory signals and send out motor commands. And we say nerves pass through the intervertebral foramen. That is the foramen that is created by the two vertebrae. So we've got the, you've got the vertebral groove on the inferior side of the vertebrae above, and the same groove on the superior side of the vertebra below. And when the two vertebrae articulate together, you now have a hole for that nerve to come out of. That is what happens with chiropractors and car accidents and nerve compression things, is if one of those vertebrae is misaligned, then the foramen for the nerve becomes misaligned and you start pinching a nerve. And that's what a chiropractor would do. We, the massage therapist, would loosen up the muscle attached to the bone so that the bone is able to move more freely. Then a chiropractor will come in and put the bone back in place. And when you replace the foramen, there's no more pressure on the nerve, bibbidi bobbidi boo, all the symptoms go away. But nerves don't like to be touched, people, or pinched or pressed or compressed or any kind of pressure put on them. Okay, sensory receptors. So there's an entire division of the peripheral nervous system devoted to sensory reception. And these are going to be specialized nerve endings, literally the end of the nerve, wherever the nerve terminates, that will be set up to detect a very specific kind of stimulus. So just for example, with touch, your simple sense of touch actually involves dozens of different kinds of receptors. Some receptors only detect light pressure, others detect deep pressure. Some detect vibration, others detect changes in temperature. So it takes a lot of different kinds of nerve receptors to give your brain a really solid sense of touch. So if the stimulus is strong enough, then it will produce an action potential that will be sent to the central nervous system. The implication here is if the stimulus is not enough, then an action potential is not created and the brain does not get informed, right? So if the little bug crawling on your leg is just too light to activate your touch receptors, then you don't feel the bug crawling on you. That makes sense, right? So starting with touch, we have a few different kinds of receptors. We'll start with pressure receptors. They are called mechanoreceptors. And the name here is telling you they respond to mechanical pressure. We are talking about an actual physical change in the shape of the tissue, right? Mechanical receptor, things like touch, twisting, things of that nature. They're mostly found on the skin. They respond to touch and pressure. Next, we have thermoreceptors. And as the name thermo is trying to tell you, it's going to have something to do with temperature. Thermoreceptors are found mostly in the skin, and there are separate receptors for hot and for cold. So we say thermoreceptors are found mostly on the skin. However, there are other places in the body where we find thermoreceptors. For example, in the mouth and along the pharynx, the upper part of the throat. You also have them through the distal part of the esophagus. So you ever sipped coffee that was just a little too hot, right? It burns your mouth and your throat, and you feel it burn all the way down. Those are thermoreceptors. Now, once the stuff gets into your stomach, you notice how it doesn't burn the inside of your stomach? Your stomach doesn't have thermoreceptors. So there you go. If you don't have a receptor, you can't tell how hot it is. Oh, fun fact, fun little fact. Thermoreceptors, they are dedicated. They are either heat receptors or cold receptors. There is no in between. So there's a fun little experiment where you take two pipes, like copper pipes, pipes which are good conductors of heat. And in one pipe, you run cold water. And in the other pipe, you run warm water, not hot, just lukewarm. Now, when you grab hold of that pipe and you stimulate both hot and cold receptors, right? Do you know what sensation the brain will interpret that as? What will you feel on your hand when you grab two pipes, one with cold water, one with warm water?
Cold.
You say cold? Anybody else? What do you think?
I mean, I'm just thinking like technically, because if you're grabbing both pipes, I feel like your hand would be, the pipes would be in different places of your hand. So like one part would be cold, the other one would be like lukewarm.
So you're on the right track, right? Certain receptors are saying, hey, this is cold, and other receptors are saying, no, this is warm. So the ultimate answer is like, what will the brain interpret? Like, what does the brain experience? The brain interprets that as extreme heat. And remember those reflexes, guys, like the hot stove reflex. When you touch something hot, the reflex is to pull back. It will trigger that reflex. When you grab those two pipes, you have to overcome the reflex in order to stay holding on to it. It will feel like it is burning your hand. But when you let go, there is no damage because nothing was hot enough to burn you. It was just the brain's perception that you were grabbing something that was too hot, because the brain couldn't figure it out because, like Jed said, both kinds of receptors were being activated. And so the brain has to make a decision, and it defaults to extreme heat.
Is this also because you know how something can be so cold it burns? Is that why like
Yes.
the cold also like goes to the hot and it feels like the receptors are thinking that it's just extremely hot because it's so cold that it feels like it's warm?
So from my understanding, the burning cold is because it's activating your cryoreceptors, the cold receptors, and the pain receptors.
Oh, okay.
That's my understanding, is that hot receptors detect hot. So if it's not hot, they don't fire. But when you have a crap ton of cold receptors firing all of a sudden, and you've got those nociceptors, that triggers the sensation of the burning cold. That's my understanding, at least.
Okay. There's also like when your hands are like super cold. Like for me, I have Raynaud's. So like when my hands are
Yeah.
super, super cold, I like
have
put
that
them, yeah, I put them like under cold water and it feels warm to me.
Yes. So
So
I feel you, man.
Yeah.
So I'll
Oh,
hedge I'm going to hedge my bets and say I'm not an expert. So if you look this up and I'm wrong, I will gratefully accept the rebuke. But my understanding is with Raynaud's is that you've got such poor circulation.
Yeah.
Like when your hands get really cold, and that means that the nerves aren't conducting properly.
Oh, okay, that
So
makes sense then.
I would say, yeah. So what you're getting is the best signal that they can do when they're like currently being starved for blood, right? Because what happens with Raynaud's is the blood vessels constrict, which pulls blood out of the fingertips. And
Yeah, they
without
like,
blood, nerves can't do their job. So they're
for
going to
me,
be
they like completely cut off. So like my fingers turn like pale white. There's like no blood
Yep.
in there.
Yep.
Like, so
like
that actually makes
blanched.
a lot of sense too.
Yeah. It looks like when you push your fingertip down and the fingertip blanches,
Yep.
but it's like your whole
My
finger,
entire
and
fingers,
then,
yeah.
yep, and it goes numb, and your like sensation is really blunted. Yeah, that's the reflection of the nerves aren't getting blood. And if you take pathology with me, guys, everything comes down to the cell. If the cell is not getting what it needs, that's what's going on. And then all the symptoms that you see from any kind of disease is just going to be a side effect of some cell somewhere isn't getting what it needs. And if you've got numbness and like blunted sensation in a nerve, they're not getting oxygen, so they don't work right. So when yours warm back up, do the fingers turn like super red?
Sometimes it's only if they warm up too fast. They turn like a pink, bright red, and they
It
just go
feels like
numb,
when
all
you're-
tingly, and they hurt a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you're outside playing in the snow and you forget your gloves or they're really cold, you come inside and they hurt really bad. Feels
Yep.
like that when there's no snow. It just sucks.
Gotcha.
Interesting. Cool.
All right.
Now I know a little bit more. Thanks.
Yeah. So you're not going to need to know about the pipe experiment on your test. I just thought it was a cool thing. Just a cool way of illustrating how sometimes, as awesome as the brain is, even sometimes the brain fucks up. It's just interesting when you see how the brain screws up. All right, so we've got mechanoreceptors. The name is telling you mechanical receptor. These things are detecting physical changes in the tissue, like pressure or vibration, touch. Thermoreceptors are detecting temperature changes. You have heat receptors and cold receptors. Now, pain receptors. Pain is carried on very unique nerve endings. These are called nociceptors, or as I like to call them, nociceptors, because they're pain and nobody wants to experience pain. The slide really doesn't talk much about them. I'm going to go off a little bit about nociceptors. So nociceptors detect pain. And I call them nociceptors. Nociceptors occur in almost every tissue in the body, save for a few interesting exceptions. But every major organ, bones, muscle, skin, all of those things will have nociceptors. So all parts of the body are set up to detect pain. It sounds terrible, but remember, you guys, pain is a protective response. Pain serves an important function, right? It sucks to burn your hand on the stove, but it teaches you to be careful about where you stick your hands, right? It sucks to fall out of a tree and break your arm, but it teaches you to be more careful the next time you're climbing a tree. The sensation of pain is primarily protective. And as much as we all would love to have a life with no pain, when you're actually given a life without pain, it turns into more of a curse than a blessing. Did you guys see the Oprah episode where they had the little girl? She had a genetic condition where her nociceptors didn't work. So this little girl had no sense of pain at all. Like her body just did not register any kind of pain. By the time she was like 6 or 7, she's had multiple broken arms, multiple broken bones. She broke her jaw. She had to have surgery on her eyeball, and they had to stitch the eyeball, and she kept scratching at it. And they could not get this girl to understand, like, you can't scratch like your eyeball stitches. They had to, wait for it, duct tape mittens on this girl when she slept, because in the middle of the night, she would wake up and start like scratching at her stitches. She had had a broken mandible for days and showed no symptoms. That what concerned them was she had a little less energy than usual. Like she was just a little more subdued than normal. And they took her to the doctor, and her mandible was broken. And I don't know, you guys, if any of you have ever broken your mandible, but believe me, when you break your jaw, you fucking know it. It is unbearable pain when you break a thick, sturdy, innervated bone like the mandible. Burns, concussions. She'd fall out of a tree and break her arm, and it would be flopping around, and it doesn't hurt. So she would go right on about playing. They've had Child Protective Services called on them multiple times because it looks like she's got multiple bone fractures in various stages of healing. It reeks of child abuse until you look at her medical history and realize, no, this is a weird case, and she just doesn't feel pain. And her parents were just talking about how toddlers already are little like death traps. They're already trying to kill themselves 24/7, and your job as a parent is to just stop them from killing themselves. But when you have a kid that feels no pain and therefore doesn't learn the lessons of their mistakes, I don't know how you do it. I honestly don't know how you raise a kid like that. I don't have the energy.
Just put him in like a giant hamster ball.
I know, right?
Like lock him inside and everything.
Bubble boy or something. But like, and again, it's a very rare genetic disorder. This kind of thing does not happen very often, but it's those kinds of examples when you have a for real life example, a person who feels no pain. As awesome as it sounds, like, oh my God, I wish I could feel no pain. You realize pain is important, right? Pain helps shape who we are. It helps teach us lessons. And, as one of my favorites, Captain Kirk, used to say, you can't take away my pain. I need my pain. Pain tells us who we are, and it reminds us where we've been, and it shows us where we're going. You wouldn't be the same person if you didn't have all of those scars, physical and emotional. All of the scars led us to where we are today. All of this is just trying to underscore my point. Don't undersell a nociceptor. They just do pain, but they're super important, you guys. Nociceptors innervate almost every tissue of the body. Notable exception, the brain itself. The brain itself has no nociceptors. It does not feel pain. Now, I want to be super clear here. The brain itself does not have nociceptors, but look, every single layer over the brain absolutely does have nociceptors. The meninges have them, right? All 3 of your meninges have them. The bone has it. The skin and periosteum. We are only talking about the naked brain proper. The brain does not have nociceptors. But everything else that contains and supports and wraps around and protects the brain does.
So, I hate to bring this up because it's kind of gross, but the movie Hannibal was
I
correct.
knew you were gonna say that. I knew you were gonna say it. Yes. Yes.
Every
yes.
time I read it, I was like, oh!
I know, and it was so good. But
Yeah.
yes, all you would need is a local anesthetic, like I don't want to say like Novocaine, but something along those lines. It would just inject it around to numb, but you only need to numb down to the meninges, and then you could cut and saw and remove. But yeah, once he got the brain exposed and he's just like cutting off chunks of the guy's brain, yeah, the guy wouldn't feel it.
Okay.
You wouldn't
Change
feel
the
it.
subject.
Yep. No, actually, since we're on the subject, many types of brain surgery involve, in order for them to know what they're doing, the person has to stay conscious. So they'll lay you on the table. Usually they actually have you sitting up, but they'll put like this curtain around your head like this, so you can't see above you, right? This whole big wide curtain. So all you can see is like this. And then meanwhile, on the other side of the curtain, flipping brains out, man. Like you're just out, berries in the wind, bro. Just like brain out.
Can you
in the
still
air.
like feel them doing the surgery, or just like you can't feel
the
nothing?
outside stuff. Like you can feel them sawing, but it doesn't hurt. It's just a weird feeling. Like the pain is
Sensation,
gone.
yeah.
But you can feel like the drill and the vibration, and then you feel like a weight lifting up when they take off the skull. Like you
Oh my
register that kind of stuff. But again,
Do they
it doesn't.
numb?
But it doesn't hurt. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
you
like I would
It-
assume all of that stuff would be
So
numb.
so here's the thing. When they talk about when we talk about numbing it, what we're doing is we're nullifying the nociceptors, but not the mechanoreceptors.
Not the pressure.
And the touch and the pressure and all that stuff.
That's
So
what
if
I always
anyone,
like.
if you've ever had,
Yeah.
so if you've had like a C-section, right? When they do C-sections, girl, you're awake. They don't knock you out for that. You are alive and well and kicking when they go slicing into your abdomen. And so you feel it. It doesn't hurt. There's no pain, but you feel the cut and you feel everything start to get separated. You feel them like moving around in your insides. You feel the baby lift, and then suddenly you feel kind of empty. And then you're feeling like little tugs as they do the stitches, and they're stitching you. Like you feel it, but the pain is gone. But again, that's only because we're nullifying the nociceptors. That's not to say anything else about mechanoreceptors or proprioceptors or all that other stuff.
Is it like the same
yes,
thing when they numb you
weird.
when you like take out either like a rotten tooth or like your wisdom teeth? Because like sometimes they wouldn't. I wasn't really knocked out for my wisdom teeth. I was just kind of loopy, and I just remember them just like literally ripping out my tooth, and I felt it like from up in my jaw, just being ripped out, but it didn't hurt at all. I was like, should this hurt? Like probably, but it just
my God,
like
without any anesthetic. Torture, bro. Without
it sounded and felt so weird, kind of like they were just like ripping apart my mouth, but like I was just like, this is I'm okay, this is fine.
What gets me is how easy it is.
Yeah,
like how easy it is. Like when they get the thing in there and they just pull and the tooth just pops out. Like that is what's unsettling to me. But yeah, no, once they numb you up, the nociceptors are deadened. You don't feel the pain, but you feel the pressure. Right?
Yeah.
And you feel the pull, and you feel all the other kinds of sense. It's just the pain that's
like it just
deadened.
feels so weird. And then
well, your brain is set up to, like, when it feels something like that, it's expecting to feel all of these different things. And when you take a huge chunk of what it's expecting to feel, the pain, and you take all that out, now it's got just these weird like tugging kind of sensations, like the pressure and things like that. It's disconcerting because the brain isn't used to experiencing things like that. So it does feel weird, but at least now we can start to see why these things, like why it doesn't hurt, but I still feel them moving around. It's because those different kinds of signals are carried on different kinds of nerve fibers and with different nerve receptors. That's the word I'm trying to say. Different types of nerve receptors. Sorry, I hit my word limit for the day. Okay, so the slide really only throws the word nociceptor at you. I really do want you guys to know nociceptors are pain receptors. I just want to take a minute to really kind of delve into that because they are so important. They are so important. All right, next up, we have chemoreceptors. And chemo is telling you chemical. These are chemical receptors. They detect the presence of specific chemicals. Now, chemoreceptors can be found in a couple of really important areas. When you think about chemical, like where would the body be detecting chemicals? Probably one of the first senses that would pop out at you would be taste. And that's what's going on. Your taste buds are chemoreceptors. They're detecting specific chemicals. Taste is nothing without its partner in crime, smell. The olfactory organ is another huge bulb of chemoreceptors, detecting all the different molecules in the air as you're breathing. And that's how you smell everything from roses and apricots to poop. The gross part of it is, in order to smell something, a particle of that thing has to enter the nose. So like when you walk into a bathroom and you smell somebody's poop, that's because there's tiny little poop particles floating around in the air, and some of those poop particles went up your nose, and that's how you smelled the poop.
And that's
You're
why you shouldn't breathe through your mouth. Like, if you're like, oh, just breathe through your mouth instead. Like, no.
Yeah, no,
That's
you're
way worse.
breathing through your mouth takes away all the filtration system and bulk increases the amount that gets into your lungs. So like when you're outside running a race or whatever, you need a lot more oxygen. Don't worry so much about filtering. But yeah, when you walk into like a stank gas station bathroom, as hard as it's going to be mentally, you got to breathe through your nose, man. I know it sucks.
This also reminds me, like, I think it was like my 6th or 7th grade science class. We were talking about like this, and she's like, this is why you always want to like close the toilet lid before you flush, because then it's gonna like go. And she mentioned, like, do any of you leave your toothbrushes out like in the open and not in the cupboard? And like everyone raised their hand, and they're like, yeah. So this, you're like brushing your teeth, like a little bit of poop in your mouth now, and then I'm like, forever ingrained in my mind, like, close the lid before I flush, like every time.
Yeah.
Flush safe, everyone.
I'm gonna tell all my brothers that.
Do it. So that way it makes them close the lid.
Spread the word, guys.
From the toilet, you guys, 6 feet is pretty much the distance. So if you're flushing the toilet behind a door or something like that, you're fine. But if you've got one of those more open bathrooms, the other thing that I would say is get one of those little travel clippy things that clips on over the end of your toothbrush. That would work also. In my bathroom, I have my toothbrush and everything stuck on the shower wall, and I have like a glass wall between the toilet and my toothbrush. So there's like separation. So yes, your teacher was right. Yes, you're brushing your teeth with poopy toothbrushes.
Gross.
Take that information as you will. When you start to learn more about bacteria, it turns you into a germaphobe. But then the more you learn about bacteria, you're like, bro, it's everywhere. There's no way to escape it. So you just focus on the really bad ones. I mean, a little bit of poop never hurt anybody. If you've been brushing your teeth with the same toothbrush, nothing's happened so far. If anything, it's probably boosting your immune system, giving it target practice. But yeah, that's a true story. Okay, so chemoreceptors, chemical receptors. We're talking about smell in the olfactory organ. We're talking about taste in the taste buds on the tongue. But there's another sneaky important place where the body likes to stick chemoreceptors. Arteries. Arteries. We want chemoreceptors sniffing around arterial blood. What they are sniffing for is pH level. So chemoreceptors can detect whether the blood is becoming more alkaline or more acidic. And based on that input, the brain will change your respiration rate. So we get more oxygen into the blood or less oxygen into the blood, depending on what we need. But chemoreceptors will be found in arteries. That lets the brain keep tabs on the blood pH, and then the respiration is used to correct whatever imbalance we have. Good stuff? Good stuff. Now, we're getting into the next category, which is proprioceptors. Now, I say category because this is usually one that we kind of have to break down. Bear with me for a moment. So the act of seeing we call vision, right? Let me think what else. Okay, so the act of seeing, we call that sense vision. So understand that your brain has a constantly updated model of where the body is in space, where your limbs are, what joints are flexed, what joints are extended, where your hands are. The brain knows where the body is and what the body is doing. And just for a little thought experiment, consider for a moment, if we were in a classroom together and I turned off all the lights and it was pitch black. I mean, you cannot see your hand in front of your face, pitch black. And as you stand there, I walk up beside you and I grab your wrist and I raise your arm up over your head like this. You would know that your arm is raised over your head. Yeah? You felt your arm be raised up, even though I can't see it. Your brain still knows where that arm is. And it also knows the other arm is still down by your side. Okay. That whole thing is called proprioception. It is the brain's constant knowledge of where the body is and what the body is doing. We're talking about this from a kinesiology standpoint. I mean, the brain always knows which joints are flexed, which joints are extended, which muscles are contracted, which muscles are relaxed, et cetera, et cetera. The act of proprioception gives us a sense of kinesthesia. Kinesthesia is your body's sense of where it is in space. So just like we can talk about seeing and vision, and we understand they're the same real thing, right? It's just vision is the official sense term for what this is. Proprioception and kinesthesia, we're talking about the same kind of thing. The difference is kinesthesia is like the name of the sense. But what kinesthesia is your sense of proprioception. It's the body's sense of where the body is, what the body's doing. I am not talking about digestive stuff, right? We're not talking about autonomic stuff, stress response. I'm talking about voluntary muscle movement. Okay. So proprioceptors, these special receptors that are giving the brain information about what's going on, they come in a lot of different varieties. The first one we're going to talk about, we've mentioned already, mechanoreceptors. Mechanical type receptors, they're detecting physical changes, tension, stretch, things of that nature. There are two in particular that I really want to point out and talk about. Two of these mechanoreceptors that I think you guys should be aware of. Two of these are called Golgi tendon organs, or GTOs, and muscle spindle cells, often just called spindle cells. Now I'm going to talk a little more in depth about how these guys work and what their real purpose is. But for now, what we can take with us before we move on, Golgi tendon organs, they're located in a tendon. Shocker. Muscle spindle cells, guess where they are located? They're in the muscle. Both of them, by relaying their information about which muscles are contracted and what's going on with the joint, number one, they're telling the brain whether the muscle is contracted or relaxed or stretched or what's happening. The other thing is they serve to protect the injury from overstretching or overcontraction. More on those later. For now, Golgi tendon organs are located in the tendons. Muscle spindle cells are located in the muscle. They are mechanoreceptors who will also serve a protective reflex function. More on that soon. So,
Dave?
nociceptors. Yeah.
Dave, with the proprioception, is it also possible that the brain has memory bounce or whatever? Because doesn't that also happen with people that have lost a limb, and they're like for example, playing football and you lost a hand, and when you want to reach out and grab the football as it's being thrown to you, isn't that the kind of like the same thing? A hand does that, even though you lost a limb, but your hand is still wanting to catch.
So the proprioception that you're referring to would be the part that happens in the brain, right? Where the brain is getting ready to like, oh, I got to catch the ball. So I need to tell both arms to raise this high and be this wide apart and shape your hands like this. The fact that you lost a limb didn't affect the brain, right? The brain is still preparing instructions as always.
Okay.
What I'm getting at here I'm talking about the thing in the muscles of the limb that was lost.
Gotcha.
That's where we're talking about is these specific mechanoreceptors in the muscles that are telling the brain what's going on. You lose those when you lose the arm. The brain does not lose its map of the body, right? So when you lose an arm, the brain still has a map of nerves that lead out to the body. So the brain will continue to send signals aimed towards that arm, even though the signals never reach their destination, obviously. But that's where you start to get things like phantom pain, like phantom limb pain and things like that, because the brain still has a map. Like the brain doesn't realize the subway collapsed. So we're still sending trains.
Gotcha.
Trains never get there, but yeah. So with mechanoreceptors, right, joints, skeletal muscles, they respond to tension and stretch. We'll talk more about those later. All right, the next category are photoreceptors. You think about when you take a photo, there's a flash of light. Photoreceptors detect light. Surprising, they're really only found in one place, and that's in your eyeballs, in the retina of the eyeball. You have about 130 million per eye. They translate impacts of light. So light, I don't want to get too like physics on you. Light is weird. We think about light as a wave, right? So we talk about the wavelength of light, but light also behaves as a particle. So the packet of information is called a photon. So it's like a particle of light. So when photons strike the eye, that's what we record. That impact is translated into a nerve impulse, which so it generates an action potential. And then that action potential is transmitted along the optic nerve at the back of the eyeball, and it's sent to the back of the brain, the occipital lobe. So even though there is brain right behind your eyeballs, that part of the brain has nothing to do with vision. You got to go all the way to the back, kid. Occipital folks got to sit in the back of the bus. That back here is where vision is processed and integrated. The upside of that is virtually the entire occipital lobe of the brain is dedicated to vision. Like a humongous portion of the brain is just solely its sole function, process and integrate vision, pattern recognition, face recognition, solving the algebra you need to solve to catch a moving baseball on a parabolic arc, like all of that stuff. Like, bro, vision, whole department, way back there. Photoreceptors come in two types. Rods and cones. Rods generally detect shades of gray, so they're black and white, and they help outline shapes. So they do black and white, and they do borders of things. They help you distinguish like two things moving against each other in the distance, right? Cones are your color receptors. They are green, red, blue. They're GRB receptors, green, red, blue. So every other shade of color is through some mixing of green, red, blue. Now, when you look at other animals' eyes, the basic structure of the eye is pretty much the same. What will be most different will be the amount and the number of rods and cones. So for example, we say cats have incredible vision because they have large amounts of both rods and cones. Dogs, on the other hand, don't have such great color vision. It's kind of like those, you know, those fancy black and white photos where like one object will have color, but the rest of it's black and white. Dogs kind of see like that. It's kind of like a muddy sepia tone with a few splots of color. Colors that dogs see really well are blues and yellows, but they can't really distinguish reds and greens very well. As far as dogs and cats go, cats, far superior vision, far superior. The higher number of rods helps them spot movement particularly, and it's the shape of their the shape of the pupil, right? Those vertical slits that can open wider than the round spot. That's why they can see better in the dark, is because their eye can just let more light in. It's the round pupil that actually limits us from having better night vision. Fun fact. Okay, sensory receptors. We talked about chemoreceptors, taste. These guys work closely together with smell. Taste buds are located on the tongue, on the inside of your cheek, and in the uppermost part of the throat. So when you drink that nice wine, it's got a nice aftertaste. That's where that aftertaste is coming from. And I'm going to be honest, I really don't think that this is a real thing. I think this was a thing that's been like debunked. But the idea that different sections of your tongue taste different things, it was like sweet on the tip and then like salty on the side. I don't think different regions of the tongue taste things differently. I think all of your taste buds can taste all the things. I'm pretty sure that's the way it goes. But the 5 main tastes are salt, sweet, sour, bitter, and umami, which is a really hard one to try to describe. But think about like mushrooms. It's like an earthy type of savory taste. It's hard to describe umami. Mushrooms is the best. That's a good one. Mushrooms are very, very umami. All right, smell receptors. This is your olfactory division. They work together with taste, and these guys are heavy duty, man. They are 10,000 times more powerful than taste. Smell is everything. The sensory receptors are, since they're located right at the bottom of the brain, right above the nasal cavity, those nerve signals do not have to travel very far. You're talking about millimeters that they have to travel before they're officially in the olfactory bulb getting processed. And just posterior to the olfactory bulb is the limbic system of the brain. The limbic system has to do with, number 1, memory, long-term memory, as well as learning, appetite, cravings. So we think about, why is smell such a primitive emotion? Why is it that one smell takes you right back to that first date in 1974? Why is it that a smell suddenly makes your mouth water and it makes you so hungry? The reason smell has such a primal motivation over us is because the sense of smell is directly linked to one of the most primal areas of the brain. The limbic system has to do with the way you learn things, right? You learn about which foods are poison and which foods you like, appetite, cravings, and then all of that stuff has to be seared into your long-term memory, right? If you eat a bad berry, your brain will never make the mistake of eating that bad berry again. I can give you a real life example, you guys. When I was really, really, really little, I was like little Dave, I was like 6 years old. My grandmother thought it was the most adorable thing in the world that I would eat cherry tomatoes. I would just pop them in my mouth and eat them straight. She gave me a whole bowl full of them, drowned in Italian dressing. And little 6-year-old Dave, I ate all the freaking tomatoes. And as you can imagine, little 6-year-old Dave puked up tomatoes for like 3 hours. Just, I to this day, I cannot do raw tomato. I can do marinara, I can do ketchup, I can do stuff like tomato-based stuff, but just like, dude, I would take large tomatoes and I would just eat them like apples. I would just chow down on tomatoes. I loved them. But ever since I got sick off of them, I cannot eat raw tomato again. This is why. That sense of smell and your sense of taste, it was intimately linked in my long-term memory with a learning experience related to a craving that is 100% limbic system territory, guys. Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, so olfactory receptors hang from the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. They pick up scent and they analyze them and send those messages back to the brain. When the brain interprets those messages, that is your sense of smell. And this is what we were talking about earlier. The olfactory bulb is in the brain. Then you've got the ethmoid bone, right? That's the ceiling of the nasal cavity. And then hanging from the ceiling, like little chandeliers, are those nerve endings hanging down. When you breathe in the air in that rank bathroom, those little teeny tiny poop particles that you just breathed in are getting stuck in all those little nerve endings. And as they dock with the cell, their shape unlocks a specific, their three-dimensional shape, like a key and a lock. The actual shape of the molecule binds to a receptor, triggers an action potential, it's sent to the brain, and the brain takes that action potential and interprets it as, whew, man, someone blew up this bathroom.
When people lose their sense of smell, does that mean those little receptors are damaged?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is yes, but it depends on how.
Uh-huh.
So, modern day example, COVID. Why does COVID interfere with your ability to, like your sense of smell and taste? COVID is causing massive inflammation of the epithelial tissue, right? The lining tissue. So think about the lining tissue as maybe the paint on the ceiling that you've got the chandelier hanging through, right? So if that tissue becomes inflamed and it squeezes off that nerve receptor, then that nerve receptor is not getting oxygen, so it cannot do its job. And when it cannot do its job, you do not have a sense of smell. And because of the way COVID is working, it's taking weeks, if not months, for that damage to heal so that blood flow can be restored and you finally get your sense of taste back. However, other types of damage, like chemical damage, can happen as well. I hope at this point in your adult lives, everybody should be aware that when you are cleaning your house, you should not just go mixing cleaning chemicals. One of the more particularly dangerous mixes is mixing bleach and ammonia. If you mix bleach and ammonia, you create literal mustard gas. That's like literally what it is. And mustard gas is super toxic. And when you inhale it, it will chemically sear, like burn the inner lining of your nose and all the way down, and then it burns the inner lining of your lungs. It is really, really, really nasty, nasty stuff. So after you've just taken a face full of mustard gas, why do you not have a sense of smell? It's because those nerve endings were literally chemically burned away. and now they have to completely regrow. So the short answer is yes, but the long answer is it really depends on why and how the damage came about. But strictly speaking, yeah, if you damage those nerves, you do not have a sense of smell.
Yeah, I had a question about I love movies, so I'm gonna do a movie thing.
Me too.
The new Black Widow movie, I don't know if you've seen it,
I
but
haven't yet.
this isn't really a spoiler, but she breaks her nose in order to sever the olfactory nerve so that she can't smell because there's like this chemical mind control. So if she smells this certain person, like she won't be able to fight them. So she like
Okay.
does that. So it's really weird, and it's like they don't really explain it very well, but that's what she does. And I'm like, could you break your nose and actually do that?
So again, as usually is the case with movie logic, could you? Yeah. I mean, I suppose you could. And I mean, she's a superhero, so I'm assuming like with the plot, there was no other option. She like it was now or never kind of thing. So like, what do I do? Just but so here is the ethmoid bone. You'll notice it forms the medial walls of your eye orbits, as well as the ceiling of the nasal cavity and kind of like part of the floor of the cranial cavity. So right on top is where the olfactory bulb will sit, and that weird like porous looking structure, not the larger holes on the sides of it, but like the little Swiss cheese looking holes, that's the cribriform plate. Those are just the way the bone looks. It's got weird holes in it. It doesn't look like any other bone. Little nerve endings hang through there. Another structure though on this bone that's important is if you turn it to the side, do you see that shark fin like projection? That is called the crista galli. It's Latin for the cock's comb. What we're getting at is the the red thing roosters have on their heads. We'll talk about that. It's called the cock's comb, the crista galli. This is the piece of bone. You guys have heard like in martial arts, you like hit them in the nose and it sends a piece of bone into the brain and it's like an instant death thing. That's the piece of bone that breaks off. That's the one, it's the crista galli. So when you say like, oh, she broke her nose so she wouldn't smell. I mean, okay, I could kind of see that, but she also just risked like literal instant death by sending a bone fragment up into her nose that's literally attached to the same bone that is doing all your smelling stuff. So again, could you? Maybe, but I really would not recommend it. I don't care how stank the gas station bathroom was.
Thank you. I just wanted to know because I thought that was a really weird plot point.
Yeah, I mean, but theoretically, yeah, it would work. But movies do that kind of thing all the time. Like one of my personal favorites was Kill Bill. Have you guys seen the movie Kill Bill? And the first one, when she escapes the hospital and she climbs into the truck and she's laying in the back seat and she's like, wiggle your big toe, wiggle your big toe. And all I can think, and of course she does it because of course it's a movie. But in my head, I'm just thinking 4 years in a coma. No, bitch. Every single one of your muscles is atrophied. You can't even talk, much less like belly crawl your way through. Hell no. Hell no. And then just sheer will, bro. After 4 years in a coma, this bitch is gonna need a year of physical therapy just to like. She's gonna have to relearn how to stand and walk and like wipe herself. She's gonna have to relearn how to talk because all of these muscles have atrophied away. Like, not realistic at all. Thumbs down. No, 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 no.
You know, I think it's really funny because my wife is starting to get annoyed whenever like stuff like that happens in the movie. I'm like, that is false. That can't happen because of these reasons. She looks at me and she's like, can you just enjoy the movie? And I'm like, no, because it's not real.
No,
it's like, it doesn't make sense.
My husband has just learned to accept it, that when a point like that comes, I just pause the movie and I explain why none of this could be happening and none of that is fucking real.
Yep.
And then I buy back into the movie and I push play and I gotta let you know that is not real life. You do not just like hop out of a hospital bed and go like kicking ass. No, she would not be able to speak, much less anything else. I tell you what I do want to know is that trick that she did when she woke up from the coma and like looked at her hands and was like 4 years. I want to know that. That's what I want to know how she did.
I think it'd be funny if like you went to a movie theater and like something happens and you're like, false. Let me explain why. Pause it. I think that'd be hilarious.
I try to keep that to like home viewing only.
I know, yeah.
Well,
It's like
for
it's so
sure
hard.
in the movie theater, I'll be like, hey, you know,
Silently rage.
yeah. I'm gonna leave a scathing review on Rotten Tomatoes. Scathing. Okay. So back to it. Sensory receptors, olfactory receptors. We know where they are. We know what they do. We're good. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Hearing receptors. Hearing receptors are found in one location. I'll give you 3 guesses where. They translate the impact of sound waves on the eardrum, the tympanic membrane. As a result, the tympanic membrane vibrates. And on the other side, we have a bone that is in contact with the membrane. That bone is the incus, the hammer. Now, the incus, the malleus, and the stapes, the 3 tiniest little bones in your body, little ear bones, one vibrates against the other, vibrates against the other. They transfer this vibration to the inner ear, or a structure called the cochlea. And from there, you need a hearing doctor to tell you what's going on. It's not my department. I don't know how hearing works. I can just tell you what the thing looks like and how it's structured. The other thing that I can tell you, though, if you look, I don't think I have a little point. I don't think I have a pointer, but on the cochlea, right, you've got the little snail-shaped portion, a little spiral portion, and then it flows out to like the head of the snail, and then the head of the snail has those like little wiry looking things. Those things are legit. Those things are dope. There's 3 of them. They're called semicircular canals. They track movement of the body in 3 dimensions. So you've got like the left, right, the front, back, and the up, down. Inside the tube is a bunch of tiny little hairs. The tubes are full of fluid with a tiny little bubble. You guys know how levels work, right? The bubble with the little level thing. That's literally how your fucking ears work. Literally, you've got 3 bent tubes with hair on the inside, full of fluid with a little bubble. And so as your head moves around, the bubble shifts around inside all 3 of those little tubes, right? Each tube has its own bubble. Because of the way the bubble moves, it stimulates hairs on the inside, and the hairs turn that into an action potential and send it to the brain. And the brain interprets that as where your head is. That gives you a sense of balance. So when you spin around really fast, or you ride a roller coaster or something like that, the bubbles have been spinning around those tubes and sending all the hairs haywire, and the brain does not know how to understand what, okay, so everything is lighting up all at once. I don't understand what's going on. And so it interprets that and you get dizzy.
Is this also what happens like when you're seasick?
Yes.
Just like
Yes, because your proprioceptors, right? Your body is telling the brain, I am standing put. But your inner ear is telling your brain, I'm going up and down. And your brain has a lot of trouble organizing, like, how am I standing still, walking along the floor, and also like you feel the floor like moving underneath you, right? You feel the boat rock. And so that is what seasickness is, and car sickness. Yep, motion sickness.
Is there a reason why
brain-
some people have worse experiences with it than others? Because like my aunt, you could literally say up and down, up and down, up and down. She'd throw up right next to you. But
say what kind of people? I'm sorry, I missed.
Is that why some people have, or why do some people have more motion sickness than others?
Oh, some people. I'm not sure why some people. I guess some people are just more sensitive. Maybe their hair, little hairs in there, are more sensitive. Maybe the part of the brain that integrates that stuff, maybe theirs is. Honestly, I don't know. So I'm guessing here. This is a guess. But I would say maybe the integration part of the brain, the part that's supposed to make sense of all of this stuff, is either not as efficient, or maybe it's really, really efficient, which is why they can't make sense of it, because it's really good at its job. So they're super sensitive. Like the second they go up and down, the brain is like, nope, something's wrong. Or other guess, it's not as efficient. So most people's brains are able to look at what's going on and say, oh, I get it. Like, I'm on a boat. Cool. And then some people's brains are like, bleh. But that is like ear, nose, throat ophthalmologist. I'm not an ophthalmologist. That's not my thing.
Ophthalmologist is the study of the eye. Ear, nose, and throat doctor is just ear, nose, and throat doctor.
They don't get a fancy name.
They call it like they call it
I
like
thought it was like a
something else. It's like
otopharyngeal.
they changed it to like neck.
This is gonna
I
bug me.
think.
Look it up. Look it up.
I think they
It's
changed
gonna
it
bug
to
me.
like neck doctor.
Oh, come on.
And I was like,
Ew,
what?
neck, ew,
Yeah.
no.
I remember I was like,
Ear, nose, and throat. There we go. An ENT specialist, an otorhinolaryngologist. Oto means ear,
rhino.
OTO. Rhino is nose. Larynge is the throat. So ear, nose, throat. That makes sense. Literally, otorhinolaryngologist. Yeah. Wow. Okay, fun stuff. Okay, sound waves vibrate through the ear to the auditory receptors. We talked a little bit about how that happens. The tympanic membrane, that is the eardrum. Sound waves hit it, it vibrates, it moves a bone. Specifically, it is the incus. The incus, that's the hammer. The hammer hits the anvil. And anvil, you guys, I know you kids, you probably don't know what an anvil is, but you remember the Bugs Bunny cartoons? That weird metal thing they would always drop on the, the character set? That's an anvil. Blacksmiths use it. That's what you beat the metal against. Like whatever metal you're working with, that's what you beat it like on. So you've got the hammer, the anvil, and then the stirrup. The stirrup, also known as the stapes, is the smallest bone of the body. It is named the stirrup because, well, it looks like a little stirrup, like what you put your little foot into. It is the smallest bone of the body by far. And just to give you a sense of like how big these guys are, here's all three on a dime. There's all three of them. These guys are really small. Really small. Pick up, just in general, just like pick up a textbook from somewhere, open it up, find a lowercase o. That's about the size you're looking at. It's tiny. Teeny, teeny, tiny. You want another fun fact? You want another little fun fact? So the stapes is the smallest bone in the body, and the smallest muscle in the body attaches to it. It's called stapedius. The stapedius is about 2 to 3 millimeters long. 2 to 3 millimeters long. That's like really small. You don't need to know that. I just thought it was cool. It's just not one of the 640 skeletal muscles we usually hear about. And that's the smallest in the body. We know about the biggest and the most massive and the longest and all the others, but like you never hear about the smallest. It's in the inner ear.
Dave, I was wondering if we could take a break. Like,
yes.
It's been 2 hours.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
15 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
15 minutes good. Sorry, guys. I'm
No, you're good. It's fun.
sorry. All right. 15 minutes, you guys. I'll see you here very soon.